Hey there everybody, this is Brian Fink from the Church of the Resurrection with a word from the DCC. And I hope you will forgive me. I'm ironing a shirt here, and this is not just a prop. I actually have an event tonight and I need to iron a shirt. And I do the ironing in the house mostly because I'm actually pretty awesome at it. And you might be asking why. Well, I spent some time in the military, and in addition to learning how to fix $22 million aircraft, they also taught us how to do a lot of other things. One of those things being how to iron, because you got to look sharp in the military. And so I do the ironing, and I look pretty sharp. But it's interesting that I realized that I had to iron something for an event tonight, and thinking about what I wanted to reflect on today. And it's sort of the ordinariness of doing God's will. And a lot of people will ask me, especially my students, Mr. Fink, how do I know if I'm doing God's will? What identifies that for me? And most of the time, they, and probably us, are looking for some big sign. We're looking for some big reveal that we're going to hear God's voice, or the Blessed Virgin Mary is going to appear to us, or some other sort of radical thing that is sort of unmistakably a sign of God's will. And that's possible, certainly, but it's almost never the most likely, most frequent occurrence in any individual's lives. Okay? Maybe with the exception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. How do we know if we're doing God's will? Well, there are some ordinary ways that we can be sure. First, are we following God's commandments? St. John says, or excuse me, Jesus in John's Gospel says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. You are my disciples if you do what I command you. And doing what God commands is doing God's will. It's doing God's will in our lives. Nope, back up. Thank you. Because I said, you can't get in the way, sissy. You can't be part of this video. Thank you. You're not ready to be a rock star yet, okay? Doing God's will, following His commands, is the clearest example of doing His will. Now, of course, that's generally speaking. I'll give you that. But if we're not starting there, then it's difficult to have a clearer picture of what God wants of us more specifically. So you got to start by getting the ordinary things right. Am I going to Mass every week? Am I going to confession regularly, let's say once a month? Am I living out, as I mentioned last week, my vocation well? Striving in my own life to honor our Lord, love and serve Him by loving my wife, protecting her, providing for her, and raising our kids. I mean, that's doing God's will, and it's kind of ordinary. It involves things like ironing shirts and disciplining my daughter while I'm making the video. But there's beauty in that ordinariness. There's a kind of simplicity. And at least, as I said, that's the place to start. Okay? So, are we doing God's will? Well, let's start by thinking to ourselves and reflecting, are we doing His commandments? Are we following His commandments? The second thing I would say to know if we're doing God's will is to ask, is there peace in our lives when it comes to the decisions that we're making? Young lady, do not step there. Back up. Don't move. Do we have peace in our lives about the decisions that we make and where we are? Now, that doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect and happy and without trial or tribulation, but when we make those decisions, do we have a sense of real peace? Check that out. Ironed the shirt before I finished the video. And if we have peace, we should follow that peace. We should pursue that peace. And if we're unsettled, if we're anxious, if we're not at peace, then it's time to consider, what am I doing? If I'm following God's will in the ordinary things, being His disciple, keeping His commandments, but I'm unsettled, well, maybe I need to consider how I'm living out my discipleship. So starting at the foundation, keeping his commandments, being faithful in the small things, and then pursuing peace, following peace. That's a great sign to know that we're doing God's will. And ultimately, that's what we hope for. So, the ordinariness of life is one great sign that we're following God's will. And, well, here's to the ordinary. God bless you. We'll talk to you soon.